Part 1.
When Mark and Jane arrived in Edinburgh, they discovered that Mark had left his camera on the train. At the Lost and Found office, he has to fill in a lost property form.
First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 4. Now we shall begin. You should answer the questions as you listen, because you will not hear the recording a second time. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 4.
Good evening, sir. Can I help you?
Yeah, I think I left my camera on the train from London earlier today.
Did you, sir? Oh, well. In that case, we'd better fill in a lost property form. Can you tell me your name?
Yeah, it's Mark Adams.
Okay. Your address?
You mean in Britain or in the States?
How long are you staying?
Oh, I've still got a few months in Britain.
Okay, then, can you give me your address here?
Right. It's 21 Thames Drive, Lee-on-Sea, that's Leigh on Sea, Essex.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 5 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 5 to 10.
Do you want the phone number?
Yes, I'd better have that.
Okay, 0702 35211.
Thanks. And you say it was a camera. What make and model?
It's a Ricoh.
Ricoh. How do you spell that?
Ricoh.
Okay, got that. Now, you say it was the London train. What time did it arrive in Edinburgh?
At 4:55 this afternoon. Exactly on time.
Well then, if we find it, sir, shall we phone you?
No, I think I'll drop in the day after tomorrow to check up.
Right you are, sir. We'll do our best.
That is the end of Part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to Part 2. Part 2.
You will hear a talk by a tour guide. First, you will have some time to look at questions 11 to 17. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 17. Welcome to San Fernando City Tours. I'm Mark, your tour guide. We have a lot to see in 3 hours, so make sure you're comfortable. We'll be traveling into the historical district first, and then into the town center. After that, it's out to the harbor, and we'll finish up at the lighthouse, just past the harbor. That will take us up to midday, and after that, you're free to do what you want. At the lighthouse, you'll have a chance to visit the tea room and take photographs of the magnificent coastline. Now, as we have only 3 hours, we won't be able to take you around the shopping district, but we think you'd prefer to look around the shops there in your own time anyway. San Fernando has some well-known tourist attractions, the lighthouse, for example, and the National Library. However, the little-known military museum is not to be missed. Be sure to visit before you leave. Now, there's a lot to do in San Fernando. Indeed, there really is something for everyone. For those who love the water, I can recommend a trip on the Seafarer, one of the most famous boats on the San Fernando River. It does an evening trip with a 3-course meal included. It's great fun for everyone, but especially for young people in their teens or 20s. After 9, there's a disco on the boat, and it gets really lively. Then there's a climbing wall near the town center. It's incredibly popular, with a large wall for expert climbers and a smaller wall for novices. There's a junior wall and a creche, so it's a great day out for those of you with kids. And if you like walking, there's some great walking tours. The City Sights tour is highly recommended, as is the walking tour by the coast. But that one's only for the fit, not really suitable for children or the elderly. For more mature people, or those less able to get around, I would suggest a tour around the vineyards. It can be done in the luxury of a coach, and it's a wonderful way to explore the region's wines. Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 18 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 18 to 20. Naturally, there's a charge for all these attractions, but you can get 15% off if you have an Explorer Pass. If you don't have a pass but would like one, the driver here has application forms. Just ask him for one and fill it out while on the tour. Then you hand it into the tour office. Normally, it costs $10. But this year, it's just $7. When you hand it in, you'll get your picture taken for the card on the spot, and then your card is ready to use. Remember to show it whenever you pay for anything. The discounts apply not just to tourist attractions, but some bars and restaurants. Basically, everywhere you see a red Explorer symbol. We're coming up to the historical district now. If you'd like to look at...
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3. Part 3.
You will hear a conversation between a peer tutor and an engineering student who needs help with a project. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 24.
Hi, John. Thanks for seeing me today. I'm really struggling with my project. I have to come up with a design for a water treatment system, and I'm really not sure what I'm expected to do.
Well, as peer tutors, we've been taught to follow a process in these tutorials, okay? The first step is to look closely at the task instructions.
That sounds good. I'm also... well... we've been told to do some research, but I don't know where to start.
It's always hard to start with. We've got about 45 minutes today. That should give us some time to go over it. Have you done much research before?
No. This is my first project like this, and I'm really stressing out about it. I went to a seminar about research at the start of the year, but I've forgotten most of it.
Well, that's fine, because the next step in our tutorial will be to consider some common research strategies that you can use to get started. With engineering, a lot of the projects you do are practical, so you can think about how you can access other people's write-ups of similar projects.
Yes, that sounds useful. How do I find those?
Well, there's always the online databases, but you need to know what search terms to use. So, can you think of any useful terms?
Cameroon, I guess? And maybe grey water?
Yes, good. But those might not give you many hits. What about the type of research? I've always found it helpful to search for case studies, you know? There's probably a whole lot of those on systems set up for other villages in developing countries that you could look at. I've got a couple here actually. They're on different topics, but we can look at the structure and develop some useful ways to focus your research. Is there anything else you'd like to look at today?
I can't think of anything right now. That all sounds good.
Great. Then the next step is to come up with an action plan. How long have you got?
To finish the project? 4 weeks, I think. It's due on the 6th.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 25 to 30.
Right, let's start with the project requirements then. You've got them there? Great. Let's see. Tell me what you understand about the task.
So we need to create a system for grey water treatment so that we can minimise the strain on the overloaded water supply in a village in Cameroon.
That's right.
But I don't get the details about the type of system and what it needs to be used for.
Okay, we'll come back to the type of system in a minute. It says here grey water. Have you learnt about grey water?
No, I missed the lecture.
Okay, so it's the water we use in our houses, but not in the toilet. The water that goes down the drains, not into sewage. It can be recycled because it's relatively clean. So what might the water treatment system try to do?
Treat it and direct it somewhere else?
Exactly. Why treat it?
Oh, right. I get it. 'Cause it's still going to have bacteria in it. That's why it needs to be treated.
That's right. And then when it's treated, what could it be used for?
Something else, like irrigation in gardens?
Yes, there are other practical uses too, inside the house.
For toilet systems? Oh! What about for laundry?
Yes, exactly. That's a good example.
Okay, that's pretty clear now. Thanks.
Great. Now, let's think about the type of research you might need to do.
I'll need to look at different types of water treatment systems, so I know the pros and cons of each one.
Good. Where would you look first?
The internet?
Yes, but be careful. Remember, you're likely to find a lot of biased websites. You know, manufacturers wanting to advertise their brands. It might be better to use the engineering library.
I'm not too confident about using the library, to be honest. It's so hard finding the right resources.
It's often about choosing the best search terms to put into the catalogue search field.
Yeah, I try to do that. Like water treatment?
That might be too broad.
Grey water treatment systems?
That's more like it. And you'll need to search for systems designed for residential, not commercial use. There's a big difference.
I usually end up borrowing a massive pile of books, then get home and find they're useless.
Try reading through the contents before you take them out. Flick through to relevant sections. Often it helps to read parts, not all the way through, but
Just to get the main idea.
That's right. Oh, and I see this as an EWB project. Have you seen the website? It might have some exemplars of the winning designs from last year's competition.
No, I saw that and didn't know what EWB meant.
Engineering Without Borders is what it stands for.
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 4.
Part 4.
You will hear Rebecca Bramwell, an artist and illustrator, giving advice on how to get your first job or commission as an artist. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 35. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 35.
I'd like to introduce Rebecca Bramwell, an artist and illustrator who has come along today to talk to you all about getting your first job or commission as an artist. Over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you for inviting me. I remember when I graduated back in 1983, I was very excited about getting my first commission. My degree was in fine art and I'd worked long and hard to get it. I was an enthusiastic student and I never found it difficult to find the incentive to paint. I think as a student you're pushed along by fellow students and tutors and the driving force is there. However, when you leave college, you find yourself saying things like, I'll have one more cup of coffee and then I'll sit down to work. I hate to admit it, but I say it myself. Suddenly, it isn't finding the inspiration or getting the right paper that's a problem. It's you. In my view, there are a number of reasons why this happens. It's a real challenge making a decent living as a new artist. You have to find a market for your work. Often you work freelance and need to take samples or portfolios of your work from place to place. These experiences are common to a lot of professional people. But artists also have to bare their souls to the world, in a way. More than anything, they want praise. If people don't like what they create, then it can be a very emotional and upsetting experience hearing them say this. I began to realise that these problems were preventing me from having a career in art, and so I decided to experiment. I was a painter, but I started to dabble in illustration, drawing pictures for books, cards, and this offered me the opportunity to become more emotionally detached from my work. I was no longer producing images from the heart, but developing images for a specified subject, taking a more practical approach. I began to develop a collection of my illustrations, which I put into a portfolio and started to carry around with me to show prospective clients and employers. But it was still tricky because publishers, for example, want to know that your drawings will reproduce well in a book. But without having had any work published, it's hard to prove this. Having a wonderful portfolio or a collection of original artwork is, of course, a first step. But what most potential clients would like to see is printed artwork, and without this evidence, they tend to hold back still when it comes to offering a contract.
Look at questions 36 to 40. Now answer questions 36 to 40.
Well, I overcame this problem in two ways. And I suppose this is my advice to you on preparing your portfolio of your best work. The first way was by submitting my work for a competition. And the one I chose was for a horoscope design and was sponsored by a top women's magazine. There are a few of these competitions each year, and they offer new illustrators an opportunity to showcase their work. The other approach I took was to design and print some mock-up pages of a book. In other words, I placed some of my illustrations next to some text in order to demonstrate how my work would look when it was printed. Perhaps I was lucky in that I had taken a degree that provided me with all-round creative skills so that I could vary my style and wasn't limited to a certain technique. Now, I think that is important. The art world and many other creative fields do try to pigeonhole people into snug boxes with an accompanying label. Now, I think you should try to resist this if you feel it happening to you. If you don't, you'll find it difficult to have new work accepted if you try to develop your style at a later stage in your career. Nevertheless, when you start out, and particularly when you're going for an interview, it's important not to confuse people by having a lot of different examples in your portfolio. One remedy for this is to separate your work into distinct categories. In my case, I did this by dividing my design-inspired illustrations from my paintings. It's then easier to analyse the market suited to each portfolio, such as magazines, book jackets, CD covers, etc. Working under two names is also useful, as it clarifies the different approaches and offers a distinction between them. I think it's been hard for artists to be recognised in anything other than the pigeonholes that they've been placed in. Luckily, these barriers are slowly being demolished. So I really do wish you all the very...
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.